Oceanside Farmers Market was the kind of place that didn't exist on maps but lived in people's memories. Tucked between a row of surf shops and a bait shack on the California coast, the market came to life every Saturday at dawn. The sea air carried a mix of brine and sugar, from fresh oysters to cinnamon rolls, and the morning sun made everything look softer than it really was. Frank Delaney had sold fish there for over 30 years. He was a tall man with sloping shoulders and calloused hands that smelled permanently of saltwater. His Irish-American heritage gave him a head of silver hair and a face carved by wind and years. He spoke little, worked hard, and drove the same pickup truck since '98. Every Saturday, he'd set up his stall by 6, lay out the day's catch, snapper, cod, mussel still dripping from the net, and wait. Across from him, surrounded by blooms of wildflowers and bright daisies, was Elena Flores. Elena was warmth in human form. A second-generation Mexican-American with an eye for color and a laugh that made people turn around, she ran her flower stall like an altar. Bouquets were wrapped in recycled newspaper, and every arrangement carried a whisper of care: lavender for sleep, sunflowers for courage, lilies for grief. Most people came for the flowers. Some stayed for the conversations. Frank had never bought flowers in his life. Not for his wife. Not for funerals. Not even when his mother passed. But that Saturday, something shifted. His wife, Margaret, had gone back to Ohio to care for her aging mother, a 2-week trip that had filled the house with silence rather than relief. Frank didn't know what to do with the stillness. The television didn't help. Neither did the bottle of bourbon in the pantry. So he found himself staring across the market at Elena's flower stall, the way a man stares at something unfamiliar but somehow magnetic. He walked over without thinking. "Morning," he grumbled. Elena looked up from a bouquet she was tying.
"Good morning, Frank."
He blinked.
"How do you know my name?"
She smiled. "I've been across from you for 10 years. You shouted at your nephew every time he's late unloading the crates." Frank let out a grunt that might have been a chuckle. "Fair." He gestured awkwardly at the sea of colors between them.
"I need something for the house. Smell like fish."
Elena raised an eyebrow, amused. "Most people buy Febreze. But okay. You like bold or subtle?"
"Surprise-me." She chose a bunch of yellow chrysanthemum, bright, sturdy, slightly wild.
"Courage," she said, wrapping the stems. "That's what these mean." Frank didn't answer. He just handed over a 20, took the bouquet with surprising gentleness, and walked back to his stall. That night, he placed the flowers in a chipped glass vase on the kitchen table. The scent didn't mask the fish, but it softened something else, something inside him that had long gone brittle. The following Saturday, he came back for more. Elena didn't mention it, just handed him a mix of tulips and eucalyptus. He nodded. She smiled. And just like that, a ritual began. It wasn't just about the flowers. It was about those 5-minute exchanges, the borrowed moments between customers. Sometimes they talked about the weather. Sometimes about the news. Once, about a dog that kept stealing pies from the bakery stall. One morning, as Frank paid for a bouquet of lilacs, Elena tilted her head and said, "You always get flowers, but never tell me who they're for." He paused.
"For the house."
"No one ever brings you flowers?" "No." She considered that. "You should be brought flowers." He didn't know what to say. No one had said something like that to him in years.
At home, Margaret called twice a day.
She gave updates on her mother's hip replacement, complained about hospital food, asked what he was eating. He lied.
Fine. Just the usual.
What he didn't say: "I bought flowers."
"I can't stop thinking about a woman who isn't you."
"I think I'm drowning and only now realized it." On the 3rd week, Elena called out as he packed his crates.
"Hey, Frank."
He looked up.
"I will go to Busted Porchlight. Daniel is out of town again."
"Think you could take a look?" Daniel. Her husband. Frank had seen him once, a tall man with a construction vest and the kind of eyes that saw everything except the woman beside him. "Sure," Frank said before he could talk himself out of it. That evening, he arrived at her small bungalow just 3 blocks from the shore. The porch light was indeed broken, the bulb blackened like a burned-out star. He replaced it silently while Elena brewed coffee inside. "Stay for a cup?" she offered.
et hésita-t-elle.
Then nodded. They sat on her patio, surrounded by potted succulents and wind chimes. The air was thick with unspoken things.
Why do you sell flowers?
Frank asked. Elena looked at her hands. Because people forget to speak beauty. They talk about work, stress, traffic. Flowers are reminders. Reminders of what? That we're still alive. He didn't respond. Later, when the coffee turned cold, she touched his arm. The moment was quiet. Heavy. Honest. When he kissed her, it wasn't desperate. It was inevitable. They made love slowly, as if time had paused out of respect. Afterward, they didn't speak. She lay with her head on his shoulder. He stared at the ceiling fan, not thinking of Margaret or guilt or consequences. Only of how it felt to breathe again.
The next morning, Frank woke before the sun.
The house was silent, but different now. Not empty, just hushed, like a theater after the curtain falls.
Margaret wouldn't be home for another 4 days.
She'd called the night before, her voice muffled by hospital noise. He had let it ring once, twice, then answered. "How's your mother?" he asked.
She's better.
Surgery went well. They'll keep her through the weekend. Good. Did you eat anything besides frozen meals?
Et hésita-t-elle.
Yeah.
Elena gave me tamal.
There was a pause.
Elena from the market.
Yeah. That's nice of her. Frank ended the call soon after. He didn't like lying, even when it was mostly the truth. That day, at the market, he avoided looking across the aisle. He unpacked the fish like always, lined them on ice, and greeted customers with his usual short nods. But everything felt louder. Brighter. Like the whole world had caught on fire while pretending nothing changed. Elena didn't approach him. Didn't wave. Her flower stall was as radiant as ever, but she moved with caution, as if each step might crack the ground beneath her. By noon, Frank couldn't take it. He crossed the aisle and stood by her stall. She was arranging a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, her fingers moving with deliberate calm. He cleared his throat.
Elena.
She looked up. Her eyes were unreadable. I didn't want it to feel weird. She didn't smile. But it does. He nodded. It wasn't a mistake, she said quietly. But it's also not something I do lightly. Me neither. They stood in silence, the world moving around them, kids laughing, vendors shouting prices, seagulls circling above. Are we pretending it didn't happen? He asked. She took a breath. I'm too old to pretend. Frank wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to offer something, a promise, a plan, even a proper apology. But all he managed was, I haven't felt that alive in years. Her eyes softened. Me neither. That was enough for now. Over the next week, they resumed their silent ritual. He bought flowers. She chose them without asking. Neither of them said much, but their eyes lingered longer, their voices gentler. One Thursday evening, as the sun dipped below the Pacific, Frank stopped by her house again. This time, he brought fresh cod and a bottle of white wine. I can cook, he offered.
Elena looked.
Let's see. They ate on her porch.
No candle, no pretense.
Just grilled fish, wine, and 2 people who'd long outgrown the need for performances. She asked about his childhood in Boston. He asked about her father, who used to be a gardener in Santa Barbara. By the time the plates were cleared, it felt less like a secret and more like a sanctuary. They didn't sleep together that night. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder while he hummed an old tune he couldn't remember the name of.
The next morning, Margaret called again.
Her voice was flat. Mom's doing better. They might release her early. Frank didn't respond right away. I'll book a flight back on Sunday, she added. He said okay, then hung up. At the market that Saturday, Elena handed him a bouquet of peonies. What do these mean? He asked.
Compassion.
He nodded, not quite ready to meet her eyes. That afternoon, Margaret called again. I was looking through your jacket for the checkbook. Found this. Her voice was calm, almost detached.
Frank froze.
What? A pressed flower.
Yellow chrysanthemum.
I remember it. You put it in that ugly green vase. I thought it was weird at the time. He didn't say anything. Frank.
What is going on?
Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. I don't know, he finally said. I'm trying to figure it out. Well, figure it out fast. I'm not flying across the country to walk into something half-broken. He hung up before he could say something he'd regret. That night, Elena sat across from him in her living room. I think she knows, Frank said. Elena nodded.
Daniel doesn't.
But he knows something's off. Frank looked around the room, at the woven blankets, the photos of Isabel as a child, the small bookshelf filled with poetry and gardening books. Do you ever think about leaving? He asked. Elena sipped her tea. Sometimes. But Isabel's in school.
Daniel est not cruel.
Just absent. Would you go if I asked? She looked at him, long and steady. Would you ask? Frank didn't answer. But something in his silence was louder than words. The next day, she found a note tucked inside the bouquet he'd picked up that morning. Bus station.
7 heures du matin Tuesday. If you want to go, you'll be there.
She read it 3 times. That night, she told Isabel she'd be out of town for a few days, a quick visit to her cousin in Sacramento. Isabel barely looked up from her laptop. Okay.
Just text me when you get there.
Elena didn't sleep that night. She packed a small bag, checked it twice, then sat by the window until the sky began to pale. By 6:45 a.m., she was at the station, clutching a thermos of coffee and watching each bus pull in with a mix of dread and hope. At 7:10, Frank still hadn't arrived. At 7:25, a woman who worked the ticket booth approached her.
Are you waiting for Someone?
Elena hesitated. Yes. The woman held out a folded piece of paper. He told me to give you this, just in case. Elena opened it. The handwriting was Frank's. If I don't show up, it's not because I changed my mind. Something came up. I meant every word. If I make it through this, I'll find you. Her hand trembled. She sat on the bench, stunned, the buzz of the station fading behind the sound of her own heart pounding. She waited another 30 minutes. Then she got up, took a cab home, and cried in the shower until the water ran cold. She didn't hear from him that day. Or the next. Until Tuesday evening, when her phone rang.
The Calais Ideride, Merci Général Hospital.
She froze. A nurse explained that Frank had been hit by a car crossing an intersection near the station. Mild concussion.
Broken wrist.
Stitches above the eyebrow. His phone was damaged, the nurse said. You were listed as an emergency contact. Elena couldn't speak. He's asking for you. She whispered, I'm coming. And for the first time in years, she ran. Elena sat in the hospital room for hours, watching the heart monitor blink its steady rhythm. Frank lay motionless, bandages on his forehead and wrist, one eye still slightly swollen. He looked older, more fragile than she'd ever seen him. And yet, there was something peaceful about the way he breathed, slow, steady, unafraid. When he finally opened his eyes, she was there, holding his hand. You showed up, he murmured. I told you I would. He tried to smile. Sorry I missed our bus. She chuckled, brushing a hand gently through his hair. Next time, try not to walk into traffic. It was a red light. I thought I had time. You didn't. I do now, he whispered. They stayed like that, not saying much. Just existing in the same space, without expectation or performance. The doctor came in later, said he could go home in a day or two, as long as someone stayed with him for the first night. Elena didn't ask. She just looked at Frank and nodded. She brought him to her house that Thursday. He moved slowly, wincing with every step, but stubbornly insisted on walking without help. She fixed up the guest room, made soup, and left the door open so he could hear her moving through the house. That night, he fell asleep listening to her hum in the kitchen. But outside the walls of their fragile refuge, the world was stirring. Daniel returned from a job in Arizona that weekend. He noticed the folded laundry on the couch, the fresh flowers on the kitchen table, the smell of rosemary and lemon in the hallway. All details that didn't feel like Elena's usual routine. Isabel home? He asked. She's at a study group, Elena replied, not meeting his eyes. Daniel nodded, but his gaze lingered on her too long. He didn't ask questions, not yet. But something in his posture changed. That night, after dinner, Elena sat in Isabel's room, watching her daughter scroll through her phone. "I'm going to tell your father soon," Elena said quietly. Isabel looked up. "Tell him what?" "That I've been seeing someone."
Isabelle froze.
"Mom. I know it's hard. I know it's messy. But I need you to know I'm not hiding it anymore." Isabel stared at her, lips pressed tight. "Is it serious?" Elena nodded. "It's not new. But yes. It matters." "Does he know about me?" "He does."
Isabelle sat back, crossing her arms. "You reste de me tout believe in loyalty."
"In commitment. In staying and fixing things." "I did," Elena whispered. "And I believe in those things. But I also believe in not disappearing just to keep the peace." Isabel didn't answer. After a long pause, she said, "I'm going to need time."
Un instant. The next day, Margaret came home.
Frank had returned to his own house the night before, against Elena's wishes. He said he needed to face things. Margaret walked in without ceremony, dropped her suitcase in the hallway, and stood in the kitchen staring at the green vase still sitting on the table. "What is that?" Frank stood by the sink. He didn't answer immediately. "Frank. It's from the market."
No.
"It's from her, isn't it?" He didn't respond. Margaret folded her arms. "You going to lie? Or are we past that now?" He turned to face her. "I'm not going to lie." Her jaw tightened. "How long?" "Months." She stared at him, blinking once, then again, like trying to process static. "I gave 30 years to this marriage."
I built a life with you. I gave up a job, my family, my freedom.
"And this is how you thank me?" Frank didn't raise his voice.
I gave 30 years too, Margaret.
"And I was dying inside." "Then you should have said something." "I didn't know how." She shook her head.
No.
"You just knew how to leave without leaving." Typical. He didn't argue. He let her storm out of the room. The following Saturday at the market, things were different. Vendors whispered. Eyes followed Frank and Elena as they unloaded their goods. Someone had said something, maybe a customer overheard, maybe one of the younger vendors had seen them leave together one night. Whatever it was, the silence that surrounded them was no longer neutral. It was sharp, judging. And then came the video. Someone had filmed them weeks earlier, Frank touching Elena's back gently as they packed up at twilight, a brief kiss before getting into his truck. The clip, less than 30 seconds, was posted on a local Facebook group with the caption, "Old Love or Old Shame?" Within a day, it had over 10,000 views. By Monday, half the market vendors had seen it. Some said nothing. Others made it their business.
She's mariée, right?
So is he. What are they thinking? Maybe they deserve each other. Isabel saw it on her way to class. She stared at her phone, her face pale, fingers trembling. She turned it off and walked into the lecture hall like a ghost. Daniel saw it the next morning. He watched the clip twice, then once more. He didn't say a word. He just closed the tab, poured himself a cup of coffee, and sat at the table. Elena found him there, reading the newspaper like it was any other day. "You saw it?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah. And?" He folded the paper. "I figured it out weeks ago." "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked up. "Because I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop you." That stopped her cold.
Daniel sighed.
"I haven't been the best husband. I've been tired for a long time. We both have."
So what now?
"I'm not going to fight for something neither of us wants to fix." He got up, walked past her, and said over his shoulder, "You don't need to run anymore, Elena. Just go." The next morning, Elena woke to a folded note on the kitchen table. It was from Isabel. "I don't understand everything yet. But I know this, I don't want a mother who's empty.
You want one who is brave. Do what you need to do. Just don't disappear again. Isabelle."
She sat at the table for a long time, staring at the note, coffee cold in her hand, the world outside waking up without her. Later that day, Frank arrived at the market alone. Margaret had packed her things. No fight.
No cérémonie.
Just gone. His stall was half full. The fish didn't matter anymore.
Across the way, Elena stood by her flowers, head-high, unsteady.
They didn't smile. Didn't wave. But between them, across that stretch of concrete and cracked pavement, something passed.
Not forgiveness. Not résolution.
But understanding. By the following Saturday, the market felt less like a community and more like a courtroom. Vendors no longer whispered behind hands. They didn't need to. The clip had spoken louder than any rumor could. In it, Frank's weathered hand grazed the curve of Elena's back, and she leaned into him with the ease of a woman who'd done so many times before. The kiss was brief, almost hesitant, but not hidden. Not denied. The comment section below the video had exploded. He's a married man. She has a husband. Disgusting. Let them be. At their age, love is rare. You don't destroy two families to chase a late romance. Some defended them.
Most condemned.
Frank arrived first, as always. He parked farther down the block than usual, not ready to walk through the gauntlet of familiar faces. His steps were slower, not because of his healing wrist, but because of the weight in his chest. He didn't meet anyone's eyes as he set out the morning's fish. Elena came 20 minutes later. She wore a plain dress, no makeup, her hair tied back. Her stall looked the same, tulips, sunflowers, roses, but she moved like a woman walking into fire. Some customers came. Most didn't. Frank looked across the way at her, as he always had. She didn't look back.
At noon, the sky grew overcast. The clouds pressed low, thick with unspoken tension.
That was when Margaret arrived.
She wasn't dressed for confrontation, jean, flat, a cardigan too light for the wind.
But there was nothing light about her walk. She moved through the market like a blade, eyes locked ahead, lips tight. Frank saw her first. He stood straighter, his hands going still over a tray of oysters. Elena saw her next. Margaret didn't go to Frank. She went straight to the flower stall. Elena didn't move. She didn't speak. Margaret stood across the wooden counter, eyes roaming the bouquets as if choosing one, then looked up. You're prettier than I expected.
Elena blinked.
I don't know what to say to that. Margaret smiled coldly. That makes two of us. The vendors around them fell silent. Conversations died. Knives stopped chopping. Even the seagulls above seemed to hover in pause. I wanted to hate you, Margaret said. Still might. But I've come to understand something. Elena waited. I don't think you took him. I think I lost him years ago. Maybe I gave him away without realizing it. Elena's voice was quiet. I never meant for any of this to happen. No one ever does. That's the problem.
Margaret glanced at the flowers.
He used to bring me weeds when we first dated. Said he liked how stubborn they were. Said they reminded him of me. A beat of silence passed. Now he brings you peonies. Elena didn't respond. Margaret looked back up.
You want to make a scene.
This market has seen enough of our story. She stepped back. But I want you to know this, I'm walking away with dignity. You'll have to decide if you can do the same. With that, she turned and walked back down the aisle. Frank watched her go. He didn't follow. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Daniel arrived half an hour later. Unlike Margaret, he wasn't quiet. He walked up to Frank's stall first, hands in his jacket pockets. Frank stiffened. Daniel.
You et all quick.
Frank didn't answer. Daniel nodded slowly.
You love her.
Yes. Another nod. Daniel's jaw worked for a moment, then he looked toward Elena's stall. She deserved better than both of us. But at least now, she knows what she wants. He turned to go but paused.
You break her heart again, Delaney, I don't care how old we are.
I'll make you regret it. Frank nodded. Fair. Then Daniel did the one thing Frank didn't expect. He held out his hand. Frank took it. Their handshake was brief, tense, but real.
Daniel walked to Elena next.
He stood in front of her stall, looked over the blooms, and then at her. "I'm filing the papers this week," he said. Elena nodded. "Okay. I'll always be Isabel's dad. And I'll always want the best for you. Even if it isn't me." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment, they were two people standing at the end of something they both knew had run its course. "Thank you," she whispered. He walked away without another word. The market slowly returned to motion. Vendors resumed their chatter, customers filtered back, and the buzz of everyday life resumed. But something had shifted. The storm had passed. Not without damage, but without destruction. Elena stood behind her stall, her hands trembling slightly. Frank crossed the aisle. He didn't speak at first. Just stood beside her. Finally he said, "I didn't know she'd come." "I'm glad she did. She was honest. She was brave." Frank turned toward her. "And you?" "I don't know if I'm brave yet." He reached for her hand. "Maybe we can be brave together." They stood like that as the sky began to clear, the sun breaking through the clouds in pieces. Across the street, a teenage boy took a photo of them. Later that day, it would show up on Instagram with the caption, "Not all endings are sad." The photo would go modestly viral. Some would call it beautiful. Some would call it shameful. But for Frank and Elena, it didn't matter anymore. They had already been judged. Now they were just trying to live. Frank didn't return to the market the next Saturday. His stall sat empty for the first time in over 3 decades. The usual rhythm of sunrise, buckets of ice, stacks of fish, and shouting customers had been broken. Some vendors noticed. Some didn't. But those who did said nothing, only exchanged quiet glances across the aisles.
Elena calme, à usual.
Her flowers were arranged more modestly than before, fewer colors, smaller bundles, more silence in her hands. But she stood straight, and she didn't hide. Customers returned slowly, some still unsure, others pretending nothing had happened. She was kind to all of them. She didn't ask why Frank wasn't there. But she knew. At the end of the day, as she packed up the last of the stems, she found an envelope tucked between 2 pots of rosemary. No name, just her first initial, scrawled in familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter.
Elena,
"I didn't go to the market today. Not because I was ashamed, and not because I didn't want to see you, but because I think it's time I stop standing in the same place, hoping life will look different.
tirtilleurs ago, I promise de Someoni d'Estei.
I kept that promise.
Un tilibrokit.
And now, for the first time in my life, I want to make a new promise.
One d'etes honest.
One that starts from scratch. There's a small town up north, Astoria.
Hydrov truitons.
Fishing boats, wide skies, and a market by the pier.
No one knows me there. No one knows US.
I've rented a room above a diner and found someone willing to sell part of their fish stall. It's not much, but it's enough. If you want to come, you know where to find me. If you don't, I'll understand. But I hope you do. Frank." Elena read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her bag. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But something inside her shifted, the quiet turn of a key in a long-locked door. That night, she sat across from Isabel at the kitchen table. Her daughter hadn't brought up the video again, or the whispers at school, or the letter she'd left weeks ago. But she'd stayed. That was enough. "I'm thinking of leaving," Elena said softly. Isabel looked up. "Where?"
Oregon.
"A town called Astoria." "For him." Elena nodded. "But also for me." Isabel was quiet for a long moment. "You've always taught me to think before I leap," she said. "I've spent most of my life thinking," Elena replied. "I think I've earned a leap." Isabel took a sip of her tea. Then she smiled, small, unsure but real. "Send me the address. I'll visit once finals are over." Elena's throat tightened, but she just nodded. She packed lightly. Just a suitcase, her old camera, and a small box of flower seeds she'd kept since her father passed, his handwriting still faded on the label, "Marigolds for strength." She left a note for Daniel, short and simple. Thanking him for the years. Apologizing for the silence. Wishing him peace. She left the key under the mat. When she arrived in Astoria, the sky was overcast. the kind of soft gray that made the ocean look endless. The diner above which Frank had rented a room sat at the corner of a sleepy intersection. A bell jingled when she pushed open the door. He was already there, sitting at a booth by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then she walked to him. "I hope the fish is better than the coffee," she said. He smiled. "So far, both are pretty average."
She slid into the booth.
"Then I guess we can build something decent from scratch." They didn't talk about the past. Not that day. Not the next. They walked along the shore. Found a small apartment above the florist who had a daughter leaving for college. The woman offered Elena a spot in her shop, just mornings, if she wanted.
Nothing permanent.
Frank taught her how to gut a fish. She taught him how to care for tulips so they didn't wilt before noon. They cooked together.
Simple meal.
Mostly seafood and beans. One night, she made pozole, and he burned the tortillas. They laughed until tears came. The first time they slept in the same bed again, it was quiet. No urgency. No guilt. Just the quiet rhythm of two bodies finally at peace. Months passed.
Spring came.
Then summer. Isabel visited in July. She brought photos from school, stories from campus protests, and a new haircut that made Elena smile with pride. Frank taught her how to deb one a halibut. She helped him build shelves in the stall. They didn't talk about what happened. But one night, Isabel hugged Elena tight and whispered, "I'm glad you chose joy." By autumn, their life had become something steady.
Not perfect.
But real. Some days, Frank still woke with regret. Some nights, Elena missed the sound of Daniel typing late at night or Margaret's stern voice echoing down the aisle of the market. But mostly, they were grateful. Grateful for a second chance. For the risk they took. For the fact that even after being judged, bruised and half-broken, they still found their way back to something whole. On the first anniversary of the letter, Elena planted marigolds behind their apartment. Frank helped her till the soil. She pressed the seeds into the dirt gently, like a prayer. "What do they mean again?" he asked. "Strength," she said. "And what do peonies mean?"
Compassion.
He kissed the top of her head. "Then I guess we're doing just fine." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the sea. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had spoken enough. Now, it was time to live.